Alrighty, it looks like it's 11, so we'll go ahead and kick things off. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Industry Insights, Episode 5. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We are thrilled to have our special guests, Clay Starr, Director of Engineering Applications at Arcadis, and Glen Hines, Director of Building Information Modeling Systems at Prologis, join us to share their personal strategies and experiences in successfully navigating the path to budget for a BIM content management tool at their respective firms. I'm also pleased to introduce our host, Unify's very own BIM specialist, Jay Merlon, who will lead our conversation today. Before I hand things over to Jay to get things started, I want to note that if you have any questions that come up throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A tool at the bottom of your Zoom window to ask. We will answer these at the end of our interview. Without further ado, I'll hand the floor over to Jay to get the interview with Clay and Glen started. Jay, take it away.
All right, thanks, Laura. Hi, everyone. This is Jay Merlon, BIM specialist at Unify Labs. Before we get into the open discussion with our panelists, I'd like to kick things off with a quote that I think will get everyone's gears turning. Gaining buy-in will require a shift in mindset. It's time to go bigger. Start thinking about your boss's boss, the business as a whole. So this is an appropriate concept when working towards adopting any new piece of software at any size firm, really. And even though this shiny new tool will make your job easier, why does that matter to your boss or your boss's boss, or even the entire company as a business? So now making your job easier does mean being more efficient. And I think that we can all agree that efficiency is important for profitability. But really, it's up to you to prove that in order to gain buy-in. So let's try to keep this in mind as we engage in today's discussion. So I'd like to introduce our two panelists for today, Clay Starr, who is the Director of Engineering Applications at Arcadis, and Glen Hines, the Director of Building Information Modeling at Prologis. So first and foremost, thank you guys again for joining us today. We do appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to have this discussion with us. So Clay, Arcadis is one of our most recent customers. So first of all, welcome to the Unify family. Can you tell us about Arcadis and what you do as the Director of Engineering Applications?
Sure, yeah, thanks, Jay. So Arcadis, we are a global engineering and design consultancy. We have about 27,000 employees all over the world. Our headquarters are in, Amsterdam, so we're a Dutch company. My role within the company is I take the responsibility for all of our engineering and design technologies that we use to drive our design processes through BIM, through GIS, through computational design, and all the sort of smart tooling around these new processes. My personal background is I've been in the BIM implementation game for going on 15 years. So being able to take part in sort of business process transformation as well as the technological and tooling necessities that drive that transformation is where my focus is really
Well, that sounds awesome. Sounds like you're in a great role there at Arcadis. So as part of your role there as Director of Engineering Applications, so what role do you really have in the purchasing of new software such as Unify Core?
Well, we have obviously a global view of a lot of our software, and then we have very regional views. We have 4 major regions that we sort of track internally. So depending on where the use case will lie, if it's regional, so in my region, I'm in North America, so Canada, United States, and South America. If it's something regional, I'm the procurer, the final say and approver for the software. If it is global, I sit on a board of my counterparts in other regions, or people who sit on my team in other regions, I should say, that we consult and we work with those in the business, determining where the funding for a particular app or tool will come from, and then who's managing sort of the vendor relationship beyond that, as well as training, implementation, et cetera. So in the case of Unify, there was actually, we have
Looks like we lost audio there with Clay. Am I the only one?
No, on my end, it does sound like Clay dropped off for a second.
Oh, there he is. Sorry, Clay. Clay, we lost you there for a minute.
Oh, yeah, I'm here. Yeah, can you hear me? Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, we just
No,
lost you.
that's okay. We hear you now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the decision to go with Unify was mine, and then obviously working with the global team to determine funding and implementation, and final say was a bit of a collaborative effort.
Awesome. That sounds fantastic. And we will definitely get into more details there as we move forward in this discussion. Very eager to hear some more details on how all of that works. So Glenn, Prologis is also a relatively new customer as well, but I do understand you've used Unify at a previous firm. So it's always a pleasure to have these discussions with our quote unquote repeat customers. So can you tell us a little bit about Prologis and what you do as the Director of Building Information Modeling?
Glenn, it looks like you might be
Glenn.
unmuted on your end. If you could unmute to answer that question for us, that would be great. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Can you guys hear me?
Sure can.
Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, you're correct. I'm not so it's new to Prologis, but it's not new to me, I guess. So the previous firm I worked at, we implemented it, and that worked out very well. It was software and application I really liked, so we brought it back over here to Prologis. So quickly, so Prologis we are the largest logistics real estate company in the world. So we do our primary buildings are distribution facilities, think of like Amazon warehouses and things like that. So we are located pretty much all over the world. We have about 4,000 buildings. Our corporate headquarters is in San Francisco, but our main operations office is out of Denver, where I'm located. So my job here is when I came on Prologis, it was pretty much to kind of bring up Prologis into the BIM world. We're kind of unique because we do not design in-house or anything like that. Everything is done out of house with architects. So prior to me coming here, we had roughly around 170 architects worldwide that we used. And it was quite a challenge of trying to get all of them on the same page all of the time. So long story short, we've narrowed that down to about 14 architects and design teams around the world. So it's basically our design work is being done on the outside. Well, those architects are in multiple locations around the world. And with me utilizing Unify and using our typical details and our standards, I have a place that I can publish everything there all in one stop location for all of those design teams to get access to. So if I have an architect in Seattle versus one that's in Brazil, they're looking at the same identical detail and so on. So.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic that Prologis is taking that approach in the BIM technology as a technology.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like you're in a good spot there as well. So fantastic, and thank you for that background. What is your role in the purchase of new software at Prologis, or how do you support that process?
It kind of depends on what we're going after. If it's a lot of internal business operations applications, that's done by a whole different team. But because I'm on the BIM side, I make all of the decisions on that side. So anything that we're using with the design teams, Revit, any of those applications, we use all of them. I make the decisions for all that.
Fantastic. Well, it sounds like we have two worthy panelists of this discussion today. So again, thank you guys for that, and thank you for that background. So now I'd like to really kick things off here, just sort of getting to the beginning of your journey and the adoption of Unify Core. So I guess we'll start with Glenn. What can you tell us about that pivotal moment when you decided Prologis needed a content management system like Unify?
Well, like I was explaining, because we do not have everything under our roof, I needed to find a way to connect all of my design teams, no matter where they were located. Like I said, we may have somebody in Seattle or Brazil or Amsterdam, and I do not want to be able to have multiple library systems floating around out there. With my background experience at my previous firm and using Unify, there we kept it under one roof per se, but we shared it between 6 office locations. So the concept is the same. It doesn't matter if I am in Charlotte, North Carolina, or Asheville, North Carolina, we're still accessing it. So if I have somebody in Seattle or Brazil, I can still access the same point. So again, I had to be able to find a way to bring all of those architects and those design teams together, utilizing the same information and have it updated instantly and fast for them all. So of course, with my experience with Unify, I decided I was going to go with Unify. It worked beautifully when I used it before.
Fantastic. And Clay, what about you? What prompted you to seek out a solution for managing BIM content?
Well, Arcadis has adopted over the last couple of years a digital strategy around transforming our business, and one of the key components is that transformation is what we call 100% BIM. This idea that regardless of the type of project you're working on, regardless of where you are in the world, there are some very critical thresholds you need to sort of meet in terms of adhering to a strict BIM process. Obviously, a strict BIM process isn't as effective if you don't have real consistent data backing it up. The beauty of the BIM process is the information piece, and that is all driven from the content you put into your database, right? Your Revit files, your whatever program and application you're using. And given that we are so large, and that we have people all over the place, having a singular source of truth for us to sort of upload and collect and maintain and organize the data that does meet those standards of sort of data fidelity and standardization was critical. And there's only so many times you get burned with a bad FTP or emailing zip files around or something even worse than that, and trying to get content in the right hands. It was very clear that having a place where everyone can go and see all the content that is approved, that is up to snuff, so to speak, and usable by anyone and everyone was key, right? We're not going to move forward in any real way without good data. Or good content, I should say. And so this is where Unify came in for sure.
Awesome. And Clay, as you were, experimenting or trying out different platforms for this content management tool, I mean, was there a lot of preliminary research that you put into other products, and what was the comparison like between those different products?
Yeah, I think I looked at 3 total. And then, we had a requirements gathering exercise from all of our regional BIM leads. So we've got obviously a global team of BIM experts who are there to help implement and really push BIM on their projects and into their regions and their their individual business units, if you will. So there was some requirements gathered that went around that helped us prioritize what exactly they expected on their projects in terms of a good content management system. And it was, things like I've spoken about: accessibility, cloud-based, I can't recall all of the bullet points, but every time we went to a particular vendor to look at what the offering was on their content management, we had to measure it against how our requirements were prioritized internally. And Unify matched up at the beginning very, very well. So much so that I was hesitant to even really go to the other vendors. We did all of our due diligence, obviously, and found that, our priorities and what Unify is offerings, that they did align up very nice. So that was the decision to move forward, was a pretty easy one after that.
Fantastic. So it sounds like essentially we checked off a lot of boxes for you.
Yes.
And then Glenn, I know that you have prior experience with Unify, so I'm assuming that when you joined Prologis, you had experience with the product, and that was your decision to use it. But do you have anything to add in terms of whether you were testing other products for Prologis' use and what that process was like?
I didn't really test any other projects, or I'm sorry, any other applications for Prologis per se. But at my previous place where I was very first introduced to Prologis, it was very similar, almost spot on to what Clay has described. We sat down and we decided what we want, how we were going to achieve it, and all of that. We shopped it around for, I don't know, probably 2 or 3 different other applications. And we just felt Unify was the best. We gave each one kind of a test drive and all of that. The interesting thing that one of the biggest reasons why we grasped the Unify was because of the ability to have previous Revit versions available for us for our families and all of that. So if a family was built back in Revit 2014, we could still use it for 15, 16, 17, 18, and all of that.
Right.
So that was a powerful thing for us. So that way we didn't have to maintain 5 or 6 different libraries based off of whatever Revit version it was. Unify kind of took care of that for us. That was a huge selling point for us right there.
Fantastic. Well, that's great to know. So on that note, Glenn, I know that currently you're sort of the decision maker as far as BIM software goes, as you mentioned, but maybe this question would apply more to your previous firm. But I'm curious about more of the process of proposing the adoption of a new application. So maybe, during that research that you were doing with these other products, or what is the process of saying, hey, we need a solution to fix this problem? Was there a process in place? Were there paperwork and forms, or was there a written proposal or a formal presentation? I'm just curious how that all worked out for you and what that process was like.
Yeah, I mean, once we were kind of going through our beta testing side of things, we quickly realized that Unify was the application we were probably going to go for and all of that. I had to work very closely with my COO, who was very, very interested in dollars and pennies. He wanted to know it all. He wanted an ROI. Right. He wanted all of that stuff built to make sure that what we were going after was well worth it. As we were testing and all, like I said, we knew this is the application that we wanted, but again, I can't convince a COO based off of just experience. So, so we had to kind of go through the whole decision-making kind of process of creating an ROI, showing what we're going to be doing, how we're going to get, things, how we're going to get our money back kind of deal. And I had to give a big presentation to him. And then, we like I said, the biggest thing that we were looking for was trying to bring together 6 office locations. And like I said, that application worked. And once he saw it, and he wasn't the final decision at that. We had to make sure we brought in other few key stakeholders who were big players on the floor. They all loved it, and then off we went.
Okay, so it sounds like you had actually done some due diligence, chosen Unify, and then presented that to that group or that committee. So it was a one solution. Okay, great. So you weren't necessarily proposing that this is the problem, we need to fix it. We don't have the solution picked yet, but you already had Unify chosen and you presented that as a solution.
Well, we had to back up. So to kind of go back to what we were saying earlier, so we did have to determine what our issues were. So we were in 6 office locations. How do we bring them all together using the same library system? So that was our initial issue. That led us to doing the research of the applications that were out there. And after trying 3 or 4 of them, we narrowed it down to Unify. Once we made that decision, that's the one we liked. then we built our ROI and all of that I presented to COO.
Awesome. Yeah. And then Clay, what about on your end? So at Arcadis, what is the process there, if any? Well, I'm sure there is one since you guys are a huge company, international company. But what is the process of proposing the adoption of a new tool or application at Arcadis?
Well, it always starts with a business need. You know, from a technology standpoint, I could sell you the moon, right, in terms of what is possible. But if it's not meeting a particular business need or requirement, right, it's going to fall on deaf ears. So the problem of quality content related to BIM data was evident. Everyone knew that in order to really take the biggest bite out of this apple that we're calling 100% BIM, right, to really push our designers globally into this, it's not new. It's not even new to them. But it's new in the way we've approached standardizing our approach, standardizing the approach to it, right? And we knew that content was going to play a key role in this. So the business put together their own set of, like I said, the requirements we got from the BIM leads, with the understanding of, you know, we've adopted this idea that it's BIM unless. And the unless has to be a really, really good unless, you know, why we wouldn't do a BIM project. So with a BIM unless mentality, it was a no-brainer that quality content was going to be a huge contributor to the overall quality of our deliverables. So it wasn't necessarily that, hey, I've got this idea, here's the return. It was sort of, and I don't mean this disparagingly, it was a necessary evil. Right, this idea that we've got to get our hands around the way we manage all of this content for all of, you know, this slew of applications that we have all over the world. There's over 250 offices in North America alone, and trying to get our hands around, you know, what we had already, what we needed. It was again a no-brainer that we had to get something that we could centralize very quickly. That was easy to use. We could get people jazzed about, you know, sharing this content and managing it. You know, a lot of our BIM leads were very, very excited by the prospect of having sort of these dedicated libraries to, you know, to their regions or to their projects or, you know, to whatever. So it was less about, I mean, obviously cost played a role, but we knew that, you know, we know that software costs money, right? And it was more of an issue of what is it going to cost us if we don't? You know, how are we going to deliver the best quality engineering and architecture deliverables that we can with bad data, right? And that bad data is synonymous with bad content. So how do we ensure that we can overcome this, and what money and projects we're going to lose out on if we don't? That was the direction we came from, and I think it was. Everyone understood that this was something that had to happen.
Well, that's awesome. I guess because occasionally you would have teams, and you know, I'm probably speaking for some of our listeners now, where the concept of a BIM content management system is sort of foreign to some of the decision makers. Like if you're talking to, let's say, a smaller firm who just has an IT manager or a CFO that is approving a purchase of a software, you have to really pitch the concept of a content management system and then really prove the value that way. So it sounds like that your firm, your team already understood the value. It was just a matter of presenting the need and proving the ROI and things like that.
Yeah, the really the selling feature for us was the content request mechanism. We have content we have content developers in India and other parts of the world, and being able to communicate very rapidly and very succinctly the desires of any design team in a sort of a feedback loop situation where content is requested, content is approved, and or improved upon until it is finally, you know, given the go-ahead to be put into the library. Being able to communicate very rapidly and in a very standardized way was a really critical part, because this was something we were absolutely missing out on. Quality of content coming back from different regions would vary wildly, and it was based on the amount of input any other given region would provide. So having a really standard way to converse about the requirements of the content was a really big selling point for us.
Awesome. And on that note, Glenn, what were some selling points for you as you were pitching the concept of a BIM content management system? Maybe not at Prologis, but maybe at your prior firm.
Again, almost spot on with what Clay is saying. You know, with Unify, that content is what we were going after. We had an entire BIM kind of design team, and it was their job to create that content. You know, we did allow our people to request information. Once we saw that information up there, you know, we were quickly building and be able to push that right back up into our libraries and all of that. You know, and the way technology is changing, you know, as Clay mentioned, you know, it's really, you're trying to live in this true BIM world, and with people now spread out all over, you really got to try to figure out how to bring them together. I'm a giant cloud fan, so anything that I can post online that we can all access, and kind of anymore, you know, a lot of people, and I may be sure this is where at Arcadis as well as here at Prologis or at my previous firm, is that we didn't want to limit ourselves because we all travel so much. And we wanted to be able to have access to that content at all times. So even though that at my previous firm, you know, we didn't use the library systems just for Revit families. There was some of our documentation, some of our things was published up there. So again, you know, your BIM execution plans or standard guidelines, they were able to read those and have access to that anywhere. That's the thing with here at Prologis. I mean, I'm on the road all the time. I want to be able to still see and have access to that content no matter where I'm at. So to me, that's just a giant selling point. The content that gets put up there is only as good as what you create. You know, if you push garbage up, it's what you're going to get inside your model. So if you have really good content that you're pushing, you're going to have good content that you're putting inside your model. So, like I said, so some of that the biggest selling point to me is that it is so universal no matter where you are located. So,
fantastic. That's great insight. So jumping back a little bit and starting to talk about the entire process of getting a new application or a new tool approved within a firm. I'm curious about sort of what I used to call like the testing phase. So, you know, you've got, for one of my previous firms, we would actually we would need a budget to test software, which I think seems to make sense for some of our listeners as well. Now, I'm curious about what the testing process was like, or the test phase was like at Arcadis. You know, particularly being a multidiscipline, multi-office organization, it sounds like you had some regional leads. Can you tell us more about how that went? And even maybe if we can get into some detail about how that was documented, right? Like opinions were documented or any sort of findings that they had while testing the product.
Sure. Yeah, so when we decided to move ahead with a pilot, we worked with Unify sales team to establish a pool of users. I think we settled on 40. That was kind of our test bed, 40 Arcadis users, and we had split those users across the globe. You know, obviously we've got regional. We want to make sure we've got good regional coverage and also good business line coverage. So, you know, if for instance, water engineering is primarily done out of the U.S., but we do rail and road and bridge work in U.S., Australia, and everywhere else. So we needed good representation across the business lines as well, the various types of work. And these were all people that were put forth by the BIM leads. So we've got these BIM leaders who sit in each of the regions, who've got a team, not a direct reporting team, but basically a cadre of people, subject matter experts, who they felt would be able to contribute the most amount of feedback. So we established this team very early on and worked with the implementation team at Unify to get their accounts set up, and that all went really very smoothly. We then were very clear, we set up a Microsoft Teams site. I don't know how familiar everyone is with Teams, but it's think of Slack, but it's Microsoft's version of it. And it's probably more nuanced than that, but regardless, it was a place where these 40 people could also go, where I had different channels set up for Q&A, for feedback on standards. Somebody would develop a PDF, let's say, of how they think content should be organized, or things like naming conventions, or how we were going to truly use tags. Is it tags or libraries? Which are more important? And people would be able to comment kind of in real time. Some of the FAQs that would come in, I would pull those out of Teams, and I would supply those directly to the Unify support, and I would get an answer back sometimes same day. There'd be 5 bullet points. Hey, we're seeing this. Are we doing it right? What buttons are we pushing wrong? Et cetera. What should we be doing instead? And the support team would get right back to us. I would take those answers. I'd put them back on the team side, alert everyone that, hey, these questions have been answered. And we just kind of kept this rolling log of, we had an FAQ channel. We had a kind of a standards discussion channel. And then there was a user acceptance channel where we had, I'd put a spreadsheet up with some very specific commands, things you might do in Unify, and just basically saying, hey, did it work? Is this something that worked for you? Was it complicated? From a user acceptance standpoint, do you feel like it kind of met your needs? And we spread that across all 40 of our test subjects for the better part of, I think we had a 30-day trial. Unify was very cool, and I think we actually extended out to like 40, 45 days by the time it was all said and done. Very, very great sales team you guys have there to kind of accommodate for some of the questions and issues we were having at the time. And that's how we cataloged, and we kept track of our progress through, and everyone on our side seemed very, fulfilled and appreciative that all of the questions that were coming through were getting answered. We had a place on our team's site to address more governance type questions, like who should be a company administrator, who should be a library admin, how should we name stuff, all the stuff you would get into when you start standardizing, any sort of process. So that's how we kind of kept track of it. And now that we have a full contract and, we're ready to really fully start implementing, we're at a point now where we need to internally, codify a lot of these decisions that were made. Most of them have, but there's still some lingering ones we're discussing still, some more hot button issues, if you will. But that's the process we took, and it was like I said, very successful, and everyone I think came out a winner from Arcadis and Unify both.
Well, that's awesome. I'm glad you had that sort of collaborative platform to sort of discuss those things, and also awesome, and kudos to our support team for getting back to you guys so quickly on some of those questions. So Glenn, what about on your side for testing Unify? I'm looking, for our listeners who are curious about, similar to what Clay had gone through with asking questions and kind of poking holes in the product. How was that? How did that work for you, and how did you document that and report that?
To be very fair, it sounds like Clay and I are kind of cut from the same cloth. So very similar approach. I mean, almost spot on. Probably not as many users. We had 6 because we had 1 in each office location. We had our BIM team. That BIM team just did not make up of technical people. They were live architects or designers. Again, very same process. We used Microsoft Team to document everything that we were trying and pushing out and all that, what worked, what didn't work, and so on. Again, it's very, very similar, I mean, to what Clay has done, but on a smaller scale, because like I said, we only had 6 people. But to be very transparent, there's not much any difference than what he did versus what I did.
That's great. So so moving forward in the entire process, let's just say for the approval, Clay, I know you mentioned that you had, for anything that's more on a national effort, you've got a committee of folks, which with you included. I'm curious about that committee. I mean, I know you mentioned it involved some of the higher ups. So again, I'm kind of going back into trying to understand if everyone on that committee understood the need, or was there a need to sort of pitch the concept of BIM? Like let's say, like, if you had a CFO that was part of that committee, is that one of those individuals where you would have to sort of pitch the concept of content management system to?
So in our case, not so much. So I sit in our IT department officially. There is another group that's another global group inside of Arcadis that we simply just call digital. Now we collaborate very closely between IT and the sort of the global digital sort of team as they oversee more broader topics around digital transformation. And so I work very closely with the representatives in that group who are obviously have an understanding about what BIM is. It's their philosophy about the 100% BIM as an example. That's the driving force. They've got the ear of the shareholders and everyone below. So there wasn't a lot of explanation about why. It was an explanation about what, right? This idea that we know why we need these things. We understand in order to really drive true innovation and transformation at Arcadis, we know why we need to do this. We just don't know what to do about it. We don't know what to use. So my role in engineering applications from the technology focused standpoint and some process as well, being able to help them assess the available tooling that exists, get those aligned up with what the business needs are. Or again, back to that requirements gathering. They had a budget, and they said, "Listen, we want to fund this. We know it's something that the business, all the business lines have to be able to take advantage of in order to be successful." And we want to make it, the strategy was we want to make it so that it becomes kind of an irreplaceable part of anyone's day-to-day function, so that after, our 1-year contract is up, when we talk about funding year number 2 and beyond, that it's now the business. It's not IT, it's not digital. It's now the business going, yeah, we can't live without this. We're going to have to work this, we get it now. So there was this idea of, getting it funded sort of out of kind of above the line, if you will, just say, hey, this is how we're gonna pay for this now to show you guys exactly how critical this piece of our process is, and until it becomes so ingrained and so part of your process that you can't live without it. So future funding may take a little bit different course, perhaps. But that's the way we handle a lot of our kind of new technologies and new applications we bring on board that have especially global reach, because it has to support our big digital transformation initiatives. The least of all, 100% BIM, right? Our BIM unless mantra. But there are other aspects of digital transformation that aren't related to BIM or to Unify that take very similar approach and to how these decisions get made. So yeah, I was there to help assess, to manage the whole process. My understanding of BIM, notwithstanding, obviously the technological BIM that I have as well, played a part in that. But working very closely with those guys at a global scale to say, hey, this is how this fits into your global vision.
Well, that's great. I mean, it sounds like your challenge was actually choosing a solution more so than proving that you needed this solution.
Yeah, the solution need existed.
Right.
And in fact, when they approached me, this is, hey, help us find a solution that meets these needs. You know how to talk to software vendors. You know all the BIM stuff. You got to be the one who help us lead us through this. We understand why we need it. We just don't really know what to do about it, and that's where we come in.
Right. And Glenn, how was the experience on your end with approving the purchase of something like Unify? Was there a committee as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree a lot with what Clay had said as well. I mean,
when you get to, if you really know your processes and you really know your workflows, you should be able to recognize the holes, and you have to be able to figure out how to fill those holes. Clearly one of the biggest holes that we had was trying to bring 6 offices together and utilize the same library system. We didn't want something on somebody's machine versus another, and all of that. So we knew what our problem was. We just had to find a solution. We all do it. It happens to every one of us. I mean, if you are in any kind of leadership role, you're off to conferences, you're talking with technical people, and everybody's tool to them is the latest and greatest thing. But again, you have to really understand what your process and what your workflow is and what you're trying to achieve out of it to really understand, does that application really work? As I said before, I had a COO that I had to always answer to, and he's the guy who signed the checks. The good thing that I had in my corner is my COO was very technical. He comes from software applications background. So he knows that you can easily get sucked into these mouse traps, if you want to call them as that. Again, every time somebody goes to a new conference, they're pushed with some new innovative idea. But it's not just me that goes to these conferences. Our architects or people are always going off to these conferences, or they get presented with something new at a convention and so on. And of course, they come back to me because they were wowed by the shiny new object that was presented in front of them. But it really does take, really understanding your process, really understanding your workflow, and like I said, and finding that hole. And then once you find that hole, you've got to really understand that application. And it does take, testing. The same thing, we had a trial version with Unify, and in all fairness, most applications out there, you get like a 14-day trial, whatever. But out there on the floor, that's not enough time for us. I mean, we have to really be able to utilize our time and make that, and try to, and just the little bit of time that we have to beta test these things. But again, if you know your process and your workflow going into it, you'll have a pretty good idea right away if that's going to work. Our company didn't put up a lot of money to buy software, but they allowed us to put time to it. So they didn't invest in a lot of, so we had to really work with those trial versions. If you got 30 days, you only got 30 days to figure it out. So they allowed us to put time towards R&D. So, and then kind of going back with what Clay said, we also, IT is kind of moving into a different world with applications like Unify, because now I'm not relying on IT to maintain a server and folders and don't move things around and all of that. We're kind of taking over those responsibilities. So now as each new year comes, I'm pulling further and further away from my IT staff, because we are now managing that. We are now taking over and all of that. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, it does actually, and more. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
And that is definitely interesting to hear your insight there on the IT role and how that's changing a bit. Because yes, when you're dealing with files and folders on a network, it is quite a bit different of a beast to handle. Mm-hmm. So yes, and I did take note of how you prefer cloud technologies, which is a great offering that Unify provides as well. All right. Well, thank you guys for that insightful discussion. Now, before we get into the Q&A session with Laura, I'd just like to see if either of you have any additional advice for listeners who are in the process of gaining that buy-in for Unify Core at their firms. So Clay, if you wanted to start us off there, if you have any additional advice for us.
Sure. My advice would be, ask yourself a very important question about BIM, and that is why. Why am I doing BIM? If I'm doing BIM if I'm enabling BIM processes and using BIM authoring tools to simply create sort of efficiencies internally, right? I can manage my drawing coordination better, or I can put less staff on it. And, where I'm just sort of replicating maybe some traditional 2D outputs. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? This kind of LOD 100 style BIM. If that's your goal, right, then you're not relying so heavily on the I of BIM, the information piece. Then you may think differently about having a consistent, data-rich content management location. However, I have a feeling that most of us are looking at BIM as kind of a wholesale change to how we design and deliver our products. And our products are assets. They're buildings, they're bridges, they're tunnels, they're 1,000 things. So as we build new applications, as we develop, the sexy term at the moment around dashboards, right? We've got all this information that we want to be able to present to stakeholders at any time in our process. We want to remain transparent with our clients. We want to be able to show, up to the minute, up to the second information about the project at any time, right? Well, that requires then some very heavy lifting up front in terms of how the data is, what is the destiny of that particular data? What's its ultimate use? How does it manifest itself at a 30% versus 60% versus 100%? And none of that's possible, right, to have that good quality output without good quality input. I think Glenn said, garbage in, garbage out, right? That's what we're talking about. And if we can minimize the amount of garbage we put in, right, then we can minimize the garbage that comes out. So by maximizing the good data, the good content with all of the parameters that we understand to be important along sort of the journey that we want to take the data, because we understand our clients, then you've got to ask yourself, okay, well, if that's my goal, how can I do that with ad hoc content creation, ad hoc content management, zip files, FTPs, folders, all the stuff that we've all done, shame on us all, right? And then ultimately question why the content or why our deliverable isn't living up to the snuff, right? Are we delivering on the promises of BIM? And if we're not, I can guarantee it's because, at least one of those reasons, because you haven't considered a consistent, standardized approach to data. And I think centralizing it and making it available is critical to achieve those goals.
Fantastic. Yeah, that was great. Thank you, Clay. Glenn, any final notes before we jump into the Q&A for our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I really support a lot what Clay says, but like I said, the thing that, to me, that I really go into, whether it's a BIM-related idea or question or anything, is just really know your process and your workflow, like I was saying early. You really got to try to standardize that. I mean, if you're still fighting, somebody on the one end of the company or the office does something, on the other end of the office, is Unify the solution? Well, it could be, but you got to really know what they're both trying to, what they're doing. You can easily get sucked into an application because you thought that was the answer, but because you didn't realize or you didn't really understand your process or your workflow. I mean, it's happened. You've seen it where you realize, like, oh my God, I've wasted all this money and it's not doing what I needed. If I would just spend more time just trying to figure out, like I said, build your standards, make sure you know what you want. If you guys are all over the place, bring that together first before you really know. Everybody in Revit needs a library. I mean, that's just common. We all do for details. The good thing about Unify is that it'll hold system families as well, walls and roofs, things that we can't normally save out. So because you need one, do look at Unify, but again, don't just jump into it without not knowing what your process and your workflow is.
Right, absolutely. Well, thank you for that, Glenn. So Laura, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you. It looks like we have a few questions to answer from our listeners.
Yes, thank you so much, Jay, and thank you so much to our wonderful panelists, Clay and Glenn, for that transparent and very helpful insight. As I mentioned to everyone at the beginning of the webinar, you're welcome to use the Q&A tool at the bottom of your Zoom window to submit your questions. And it looks like we have quite a few in the queue, so we'll get to as many as these as we can before the end of the hour. Our first question, what were your organization's concerns over implementation across your locations? How much IT input was part of the selection/vetting process? So Clay, I'll hand that to you first, and then Glenn, you can follow up on it as well.
Sure. So in terms of IT involvement, as I said, I am in IT. So the fact that that the business is reaching in and saying, hey, we value your input, your experience, this is something that a relationship we've sought to build, at Arcadis between, our IT organization, the boogeyman, right, and the actual business who are doing, who's doing the work. Now, it doesn't hurt that I'm an architect. That's my background. I practiced for years as a traditional architect, designing hospitals and malls and all the normal stuff one would design. So coming with sort of the experience of delivering on projects and understanding the technical needs, the technological needs, I should say, behind how to improve that delivery, I think holds a lot of weight. So when it comes to working with the business, with IT, being able to take into consideration things like, compliance, data security, right, across regions, because, European has their own view of securities, whereas Americans have a very different view of security. So we're able to take into account some of these IT issues, traditional quote IT issues, in advance, before we get to the point where, hey, has anyone done a compliance review? And secondly, the familiarity with cloud sort of technology, cloud storage. Unify is not the first cloud environment that we've implemented. We have several from various vendors that do obviously very different things, right? So there's a comfort level that we already had as an organization with the cloud and understanding, how to manage security, how to manage, user accounts, and how to keep everything, sort of on the up and up. The biggest challenge we had was obviously as you cross regions, there are different expectations. Clientele are different depending on the country, part of the world you're in. The way we think about a particular design here in the States is going to vary widely from a way that design may be carried out for, for England, right, or another country altogether. So being able to understand that there are going to be differences, and it's not imperative that we all agree that the files be named such and such with a dash, not a dot, with a number, all of those sort of discussions really kind of took a backseat, and it became really focused on the data itself. How do we ensure we're getting the best, highest quality data information into our content that we can share, regardless of what it's called or named or its ultimate use. We have a feeling for what we need that content to look like, and being able to share that instantaneously was critical.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Clay. And then I'll hand the question over to you, Glenn, as well. What were your organization's concern over implementation across your locations, and how much IT input was part of the selection and vetting process?
Well, mainly because we were much smaller company than what Clay is at. It was pretty easy for us because, like I said, we were only in the Southeast in 6 regions. So it was pretty apparent of what we were trying to do, of trying to bring those offices together. Was how much IT involvement was there, like as I mentioned earlier, there really was not much IT. Of course, we talked about it. We talked about bandwidth that people would be going in and out, kind of a thing. But that was really it. Even here at Prologis, I just kind of demoed it to our IT staff. Remember, we're now going to utilize our architects, and so we will want them to be on Unify. So because I come from a much smaller place, not as in depth as what Clay did. We kind of knew what we wanted. We test drove it. We talked with IT, and kind of off we went. So ours was a lot easier, I think, to get into.
Yeah, definitely. And it's great to have both of your perspectives on that. And on that note, we have a question kind of in line with this. So it seems like in your current roles, both Clay and Starr, you kind of have authority as a decision maker. And we have a person in our audience who says, I work for a small firm with 10 people. There's currently no process in place to get budget approval. Since you're both decision makers in your current roles, what do you like to see? What do you recommend for me to do for the most effective way to get Unify implemented at my firm? And then in parentheses, they said proposal, presentation, etc. So Clay, I'll hand that to you first.
So in terms of, what I'd like to see, I need to know how it's going to have what kind of positive impact it's going to have on the business. I mean, obviously cost is a critical bit, right? It can solve every problem in the world, but if it's too expensive, it's kind of a non-starter. So I'm not discounting the role that cost plays, but I have to make sure, one, that it's meeting the needs of the business. If there are identifiable gaps in the process with visible flaws, right? Something that's causing problems, immense amount of rework, corruption, not being able to really unreliable data. If there are things that are causing problems in the system, right, in your process, I want to know straight away how you feel that a tool like Unify, in the case of content management, is going to solve those. Because immediately I can begin getting a feel for, yes, we're talking minutes, perhaps hours each day of rework, or we're reinventing the wheel 4 times over because I didn't know you built that because I built that, and I thought you were building that, and not being able to really identify, where the real family, in Revit's case, right, where that real component sits and what we should be using or not, and then. On top of that is, of course, the cost, because I have to internalize, well, how much time are we wasting? Is time being wasted at all? Is this a nice to have? Is this a want to have? Or is this a must have? I think those two things are kind of the most critical things that I take into account. But I always start with the needs of the business. I always have to go back to what problem exists and what tools can I plug in to solve those problems.
Awesome. Wonderful. Thank you, Clay. And Glenn, I'll hand that over to you as well. Go ahead.
One of the things that I'll be very transparent about with Unify, especially if you are a smaller firm, especially with 10 people, for the cost, Unify is really, I mean, it's a very cost-efficient program. I mean, our application, for the cost that you get a lot, and it's very well worth it. If you really think about every time that you guys are, I don't know if this is an architectural firm or a structural firm or whoever, but let's say a structural firm, they work for multiple architects. And those architects are not exactly always moving up in the latest version of Revit. So if you are, you're on Revit 17 and now there's 18 and there's 19, internally, you got to remember, like I was saying earlier, you have to create a library for each and every single one of those. So now when Revit, 2020 comes out, you have to take your entire folder structure, copy that over, upgrade every single one of your families, do that so that way you can use that in Revit 2020 or whatever they're going to call it. But that doesn't exist in Unify. Because once you've uploaded everything, it'll remember that furthest version back, and you save every time you're upgrading to a new version of Revit, you save tremendous amounts of time in just stopping the upgrade costs alone. So, like I said, again, for the cost, the price is very affordable for smaller firms, who are looking to go to Unify.
Wonderful. Thank you. And we'll just get to one final question here. I'm sorry to the audience, we won't have time to get to all these questions live. However, we will answer these after the webinar. So let's just get this final question here. How would you recommend to a firm that is new to BIM/Revit get approval for Unify or to implement it in the process of building out their content? Did Unify make that process easier? So Clay, we'll start with you.
The whole process of procurement, QA, the piloting of the software was made very, very easy by Unify. Yes, they are happy. The sales team I worked with were more than happy to work with us and some of our demands around number of users and time on tool, if you will. So from that regard, yes, Unify, they did a fantastic job in sort of enabling us to take the time we needed to make the right decision. What was the first part of the question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. That's a great answer so far. How would you recommend that a firm that is new to BIM Revit get approval while still building up content?
Well, again, I'll go back to the comment about, why are you in BIM, right? If you're driving internal efficiencies, maybe Unify is not really for you at the moment, right? You're just happy you don't have to keep all your drawings coordinated manually anymore. But when you do take that step into fully embracing the capital I in BIM, right? You're going to need good content to drive that. Otherwise, it's a fruitless effort, right? You're going to find yourself tied in knots trying to keep track of all the good content and bad content.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for that answer. And it looks like we are at the end of the hour here. So like I said, we got to as many questions as we could live, but we will answer the additional ones later on with the recording that we send out to this webinar. Thank you so much to our audience for engaging with us. And thank you so much again to Clay and Glenn for joining us today and for taking the time to answer all of our questions. We really appreciate everyone for joining us today, and we hope you have a wonderful day.
All right, thank you guys very much.
Yes,
Thank you, Clay and Glenn. It was a pleasure speaking with you guys.
Anytime.